In the Australian building industry, taking on an apprentice isn't just a business transaction. It's a sacred bond. You're not just a boss, you're a mentor, a teacher, and half the time, a bloody father figure. I'm a chippier carpenter running my own residential framing business. A couple of years ago, I took a chance on a 19-year-old kid named Ryan. Ryan came from a pretty rough background. Raised by a single mum, bounced around from job to job, and already had a minor record with the cops. But when he showed up on my site in a torn high-vis shirt, looking me in the eye and asking for a fair go, I saw a spark in him. Honestly, I saw myself 20 years ago, a rough diamond that just needed a bit of polish. I took the kid under my wing. I signed his apprenticeship papers. I bought him his first decent leather tool belt and a fresh set of Makita drills so he wouldn't look like a scrub on site. I paid for his meat pies and iced coffees at Smoko every single day. I taught him how to read a plan, swing a hammer properly, and show up on time. I treated him with respect. I treated him like family. In the tradie world, loyalty goes both ways. You look after your apprentice, and they look out for you. You watch each other's backs on the scaffolding. That's the unwritten rule. But Ryan was about to teach me a lesson that no building manual ever covers. About 6 months into his apprenticeship, I noticed Ryan was showing up to site looking like a chewed-up dog toy. He had dark circles under his eyes, his high-vis was filthy, and he smelled like a damp car seat. I pulled him aside while we were cutting some timber. Turned out, his mum's new boyfriend had kicked him out of the house. The kid was sleeping in the back of his beat-up Holden Commodore down by the beach, eating cold baked beans out of a tin. I went home that night and told my wife, Emma. We'd been married for 7 years. No kids yet. Just a big mortgage on a quarter-acre block in the suburbs. Emma always had a soft spot for him. Jack, the poor boy, she said, looking genuinely heartbroken over her glass of Pinot. We can't let him sleep in his car. Why don't we let him stay in the granny flat? We had a self-contained unit out the back of our block. It had a little kitchenette, a bathroom, and a proper bed. We usually just used it for storing old tools, or when the in-laws visited. He can stay there rent-free, Emma suggested. In exchange, he can mow the lawns, pull the weeds, and help you out with the maintenance. It'll get him back on his feet. It made perfect sense. I was giving the kid a solid foundation. I handed Ryan the keys the next morning. I laid down the ground rules. No loud music on weeknights, keep the place clean, and don't take the piss. He shook my hand, looked me dead in the eye and said, I owe you my life, boss. I won't let you down. Honestly, I felt like a bloody legend. I thought I was changing a young bloke's life. If I had known what he was going to do in that granny flat, I would have bulldozed it to the ground myself. The first couple of months was sweet. Ryan was on time, eager to learn, and kept the yard looking spotless. But then, the honeymoon phase ended. He started getting lazy on the tools. He'd spend half his smoko break staring at his phone, smiling at the screen, texting non-stop. His cuts were sloppy. He was taking the piss. I had to rip into him a few times, tell him to pull his bloody head in. Meanwhile, back at the house, Emma was turning into Mother Teresa. Suddenly, it wasn't just about giving the kid a roof over his head. She started doing his laundry. I'm talking folding his work shirts and his dirty jocks. He's just a kid, Jack. He doesn't know how to use the washing machine properly, she'd say, waving me off. Then came the food. I'd be sitting at the kitchen bench eating a standard snag on a piece of white bread, and she'd be walking out the back door carrying a massive plate of roast beef to the granny flat. He's a growing boy, and he works hard, she'd smile. But the biggest red flag? The evening routine. If you run your own trade business, you know that when you get off the tools at 5 p.m, the real work begins. I'd spend my nights in the study doing quotes, ordering materials, and chasing unpaid invoices. While I was buried in paperwork, I'd hear the sliding screen door open. Emma would slip out around 8 p.m. Just taking Ryan some leftovers, she'd call out. Or just checking if his Wi-Fi is working, he said it was dropping out. Sometimes she'd be out there for 40 minutes. I didn't think anything sinister. I just thought she was being maternal. We didn't have kids of our own, remember? I figured she was just enjoying playing mum. I was too busy trying to build an empire for us to realize there was a snake living in my own backyard. It was a Tuesday in late November. We were framing up a massive commercial roof down near the coast, but Ryan didn't show up. He sent me a text at 5:30 a.m. Stomach bug, boss. Spewing my guts out. Need to chuck a sickie. I told him to drink some hydrolyte, rest up, and I drove to the site myself. By 10 a.m., the sky turned the colour of a bruised plum. An east coast low was rolling in fast. The wind picked up, and suddenly, the heavens opened. A torrential downpour. Now, you don't mess around on a wet roof with power tools. The site manager blew the air horn and called a rain out. Tools down. Go home. I was stoked. A surprise half-day off. I stopped at the local bakery, grabbed a chunky steak pie and a dare iced coffee, and headed back to my place. Usually, you can hear my diesel ute clattering down the street from 3 blocks away. It's not exactly a stealth vehicle, but the local council was doing roadworks on our street digging up the water mains. There were excavators and witches' hats everywhere. I couldn't even get into my own driveway. I had to park my truck around the corner, about 100 meters away. I flipped up the collar of my high-vis jacket and walked the rest of the way in the pouring rain, chewing on my pie. I didn't mind the weather. I was looking forward to a hot shower, throwing my wet boots off, and scaring the life out of Emma in the kitchen. I opened the side gate silently so the latch wouldn't bang in the wind. But as I walked up the side path towards the house, I noticed something that made me stop dead in my tracks. Emma's Mazda SUV was parked right there in the driveway. She worked from home on Tuesdays, so I expected to hear her typing away in the study, or maybe having a cuppa in the lounge room. I slipped my muddy work boots off at the back door. I didn't want to track dirt all over her clean floorboards. I walked into the kitchen in my wet socks. "Emma, babe, you home? Rained out," I called out, tossing my keys onto the kitchen island. Nothing. Total silence. Just the heavy, rhythmic drumming of the rain hitting the corrugated iron roof. I grabbed a glass of water and walked over to the kitchen sink, looking out the window over the backyard. And that's when I noticed it. Down at the back of the block, the granny flat was entirely shut up. Every single blind was pulled down tight at 11:30 in the morning. Now, I remember being a 19-year-old apprentice. I wasn't born yesterday. A sudden stomach bug on a Tuesday usually translates to sleeping off a hangover and playing Call of Duty in my undies. I felt a surge of boss rage. If this kid was milking a sickie, getting paid sick leave while I was out in the freezing rain trying to frame a roof, I was going to march down there and rip the PlayStation cord straight out of the wall. I'd tell him to get his trade manuals out and start studying. I didn't even bother putting my boots back on. I just stepped out the back door in my socks, walking across the soggy, flooded Kikuyu grass. The rain was loud. It masked the sound of my footsteps. I didn't knock. It was my property, my granny flat, and my apprentice. I grabbed the silver handle of the sliding glass door. It was unlocked. I slid it open, ready to deliver the lecture of a lifetime. But the lecture died in my throat the second I stepped inside. The sliding door rumbled softly on its tracks. The first thing that hit me wasn't the sound of a video game. It was the smell. It wasn't the stale smell of a teenager's bedroom. It smelled like Emma's expensive Joe Malone perfume, mixed with something else. Something that made my stomach tie itself into a cold, hard knot. The layout of the granny flat is open plan. You walk past the little kitchenette straight into the bedroom area. It was dark because the blinds were drawn, but my eyes adjusted to the gloom quickly enough. There was no PlayStation on. There was no sick kid clutching his stomach. There was just a tangled mess of grey bedsheets, and 2 people, fast asleep, wrapped around each other like they didn't have a single care in the world. My 19-year-old apprentice, the kid I took off the streets, the kid whose lunches I paid for every day, the kid whose heavy leather tool belt I bought with my own hard-earned cash so he could stand tall on the job site. And lying right next to him, with her blonde hair spread across his bare chest, was my wife. The woman I bought a diamond ring for. The woman I was building a life for. Time just stopped. I didn't yell. I didn't grab a hammer from his toolbox and start smashing things. My brain just short-circuited. You hear about this kind of stuff happening to other blokes. You joke about it on the scaffolding over a beer. Watch out for the pool boy, mate. But when it's your house, your wife, your own apprentice, it feels like someone dropped a pallet of bricks straight onto your chest. You can't breathe. I stood there in my wet socks, dripping rainwater onto the cheap linoleum floor. I watched Ryan's chest rise and fall. He was supposed to be home with a stomach bug, right? Well, Looking at the state of the bed, he definitely looked like he'd been working up a sweat. Just not the kind of sweat I was paying him for. I didn't scream. Screaming is for people who have lost control. I just reached over to the wall and flicked on the harsh, bright fluorescent overhead lights. Click bang. They both jolted awake like they'd been hit by a stun gun. Emma gasped and pulled the grey sheet up to her neck, her eyes wide with absolute primal terror. Ryan scrambled backwards until his back hit the headboard, tangling his legs in the duvet. He looked at me, pale as a ghost, his mouth opening and closing. "Boss, Jack, mate, I held up a hand to stop him. I didn't want to hear his voice. I didn't want to hear his pathetic excuses. I walked over to the armchair in the corner of the room. Sitting right there, next to his dirty clothes, was the heavy leather Makita tool belt, the one I bought him for his birthday. I picked it up and slung it over my shoulder. It was mine anyway. Then I reached over to the bedside table and picked up the keys to the granny flat. They clinked together in the dead silence of the room. "Your apprenticeship is officially cancelled, Ryan," I said, my voice as cold and flat as a concrete slab. "You're fired. You have exactly 10 minutes to get your clothes, get in your Commodore, and get off my property before I call the cops for trespassing." Emma finally found her voice. She started sobbing, the ugly, hyperventilating kind of crying. "Jack, please, it was a mistake. I don't know what happened. I was just lonely." I looked at her. 7 years of marriage, all those plans, all those sacrifices, gone in an instant. I didn't feel an ounce of pity, just a profound, hollow disgust. "You can pack a bag and go with him," I told her, my voice unwavering. "Because you're not stepping foot inside my house tonight either." I turned around, slid the glass door open, and walked back out into the pouring rain. I left the door wide open behind me. I stood on the back porch under the awning and watched them leave. Ryan threw a couple of garbage bags full of his clothes into the back of his beat-up Commodore. Emma came out a few minutes later with a suitcase, crying so hard she could barely walk. They drove off into the rain, and just like that, the granny flat was empty again. In the Australian trade community, word travels fast, faster than a bushfire. I didn't have to ruin Ryan's life. He did it himself. When you sleep with your boss's wife, you break the ultimate code. I cancelled his apprenticeship through the government board. When other chippies in the area found out why, he was blacklisted. Nobody would touch him with a 10-foot pole. Last I heard, he's working the night shift at a local servo, pumping gas and selling stale meat pies. So much for changing his life. And Emma? Well, reality hits pretty hard when you trade a stable marriage, a nice house, and a husband who provides for a broke 19-year-old who doesn't even know how to use a washing machine. Sleeping in a car or a dingy share house loses its romantic charm real quick. About a year after the divorce went through, my phone buzzed. It was a text from her. "Jack, I've made the biggest mistake of my life. I leave him. Can we please just talk?" I looked at the message, took a sip of my beer, and hit block. Some mistakes you can't fix with an apology. These days, the business is booming. I've got 3 crews running, and I did hire a new apprentice, a good kid who actually respects the trade and knows the value of hard work. But he doesn't live in my granny flat. That place? I turned it into a man cave. Pool table, big screen TV, and a beer fridge. Because if there's one thing I've learned, you can build a house with timber and nails, but you can only build a life with loyalty and respect. Cheers, mates.